This video is brought to you by Thrive Fantasy, proud partners of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Thrive is all about player props for the top tier athletes, so you don't have to spend countless hours of research on sleeper players. The more props you win, the more points you receive. Thrive has given away $4 million in cash prizes and has over $140,000 guaranteed in cash prizes for week 1 of the NFL season. Use the promo code JG9 when you sign up to receive a 100% instant first deposit match up to $100. Download the app or go to thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop up today. And now, on with our feature presentation. This player you're watching right here is George Sauer. Considered by many to be one of the greatest receivers in the history of the New York Jets, he donned the number 83 jersey for 6 years, establishing himself as one of the best receivers in the American Football League. He led the AFL in receptions in 1967, was named an All-Star 4 times, had 3 straight seasons with over 1,000 yards receiving, and was a member of that Jets team that won Super Bowl III, giving the Jets their first and only title in franchise history. I bring this up because the next player to wear that number 83 jersey had some big shoes to fill. And fill them, he did. This is Jerome Barkum, who took over the number 83 jersey in 1972. What followed was a prosperous decade-long career with the Jets, where whether it was a wide receiver or tight end, he made a critical impact on the offensive side of the football. Whether it was Richard Todd or Joe Namath or Al Woodall under center, Barkum found a way to make his presence known. But when his career ended, man, did it end in absolutely bizarre fashion that even 40 years later, I'm not sure anyone really understands. In 1984, Jerome Barkum hung it up in one of the most confusing ways ever. And this is the story behind the bizarre end to an otherwise great career. Before I talk about the retirement itself, we need some context to understand just who Jerome Barkum is, because it will help us to understand just how good he was and why the retirement was all the more confusing. In 1972, the Jets drafted the Jackson State player in the first round with the 9th pick, hoping that he could bolster a passing attack that was anemic in 1971, finishing dead last in yards, with no player even so much as crossing the 500-yard mark, and the best weapon at the time being arguably a 36-year-old Don Maynard. And there was some definite drama at the start of his career, as Barkum held out while he was negotiating his contract, and teammate Eddie Bell didn't seem too happy about Barkum potentially taking his spot, with Bell saying that he could do everything that Barkum did. However, once Barkum wound up reporting, he quickly established himself as one of the better receivers in the game. In 1973, which was just his second season in the league, Barkum had a year to remember, posting 44 receptions for 810 yards. Barkum finished 6th in the league in receiving yards and was one of just 4 players in football that season to have at least 800 yards while averaging over 18 yards per catch. For his efforts, Barkum made it to the first and only Pro Bowl of his career. He started that season off on a high note, posting 5 receptions for 96 yards in a nationally televised Monday Night Football game against the Green Bay Packers, ended it on a high note with 102 yards against the Bills, and played really well in between. Whereas it was very clear that the Jets whiffed on their other first-round pick in 1972 with linebacker Mike Taylor, it seemed like they did a fantastic job with this selection. And even though he wouldn't replicate the successes of that 1973 season again, he wound up having a great career with the Jets, playing 12 seasons with the team in the friendly confines of Shea Stadium. By the time the 1983 season ended, he had 326 receptions for 4,789 yards and 40 touchdowns. To put that into perspective, by this point in Jets history, the number 1 player in franchise history in receptions and touchdowns was eventual Hall of Famer Don Maynard, who got in a few years later in 1987. The number 2 player? Jerome Barkum. He had become somewhat of a team legend, and especially after he scored the game-winning touchdown against the Miami Dolphins in 1981 with only 20 seconds left of the game, which played a big part in taking the Jets from 0-3 to the postseason, the legend of Jerome Barkum only grew. But everyone knows that you can't stay in this league forever. As Barkum's career continued into the 1980s, it was clear that his time was running out. Before going any further, I have to point out that just the fact that Barkum's career with the Jets lasted until 1983 was somewhat of a miracle in itself. In 1980, Barkum lost his starting job at tight end to Mickey Schuler, who would eventually go on to have a 14-year career in the league where he made 2 Pro Bowls. Barkum seemed dejected, saying on Coach Walt Michaels' decision, "I'll just have to live with it. It's the coach's decision." Yet even though he was seemingly benched, Barkum still wound up starting 11 games that season and playing in all 16 of them. He had back spasms the following year, completely overhauled his diet to cut back on red meats and to focus on yoga, and had a career revival in 1981 where he scored a career-high 7 touchdowns and had 39 receptions, which was the most he had in a season since 1974. Barkum was doing everything he could to stay in the NFL as long as possible, and in 1983, he had a fairly solid season, posting 32 receptions for 385 yards, and posting one of the best seasons of his career. He started 13 out of a possible 16 games, and even despite missing 3 starts, still finished the season in the middle of the pack across the entire NFL for receptions by tight ends. And in 1983, he had a critical second-half touchdown against the New Orleans Saints. In a nationally televised game on Monday Night Football, in the 4th quarter, he caught this pass to make it a 4-point game, before Kirk Springs returned to punt 76 yards to the house to give the Jets the shocking come-from-behind victory and keep their fading playoff hopes alive. Even though Barkum was 33 years old and was past his prime, he was still doing some damage. However, all good things must come to an end. And in the 1984 offseason, the Jets cut Barkum. After 12 seasons with the team where he was near the top in every major receiving category, Barkum would no longer be donning the green and white uniform. The Jets wanted to give Mickey Schuler a bigger role, and they used their second-round pick in the draft that year on Miami tight end Glenn Dennison, meaning that Barkum was expendable and was no longer needed. After the Jets asked him to retire and Barkum refused, saying that he wanted to keep playing, the Jets let him go, ending a great career with the team. But Barkum still wanted to play. He still had something left in the tank to give. And fortunately for him, there was another team in the New York area that was interested in his services. The New York Giants were not a good team in 1983. Bill Parcells was inheriting somewhat of a mess there. The team went 3-12-1, and among the many problems with the team, including some terrible quarterback play and a ground game that was lethargic, was the fact that they had no help at the tight end position. Their top guy that year was an undrafted free agent named Zeke Mowatt, who finished the season with 21 receptions for 280 yards and a touchdown. New York didn't exactly have a whole lot going for them at tight end, and when Barkum became available, the possibility of bringing him on was intriguing for both sides. It also didn't help that one of the other tight ends on the Giants roster, Malcolm Scott, was arrested during the offseason for marijuana and cocaine, and would eventually be cut for inability to adhere to team and club policies, which likely ties back to that offseason incident. With that, the Giants signed the 34-year-old tight end. It seemed like a match made in heaven. The Giants needed a veteran tight end, and Barkum didn't have to leave home. As his agent, Gary Wichard, would say on the signing, he just has to make a left at the Lincoln Tunnel instead of a right. Head coach Bill Parcells was thrilled to have him here, saying that Barkum knew more about blocking than most people do, and that Barkum adjusts and learns from his mistakes without anyone telling him. And Barkum was ready to get going, as even though he said it felt a bit weird to be wearing the colors of the other New York team, that he still had championship qualities in him, and that he was not bitter at all about how his time with the Jets came to an end. As Barkum said, bitterness is for losers. In fact, the Jets were very classy. They flew me up to have Coach Walden tell me in person, and I had lunch with the equipment manager, and we laughed. I didn't leave there with my tail between my legs. So just to recap where we are right now, we have a veteran tight end who had been in the league for 12 years getting signed to a head coach who really wants him, and joining a team that desperately needs help at that position. This tight end can also still play at a relatively high level based off of his production in 1983, and this tight end wants to be there and wants to continue his very successful NFL career as long as he possibly can. On July 24th, 1984, that was the situation at hand. On July 25th, 1984, for some inexplicable reason, Barkum quit the team. Normally, when veteran players like that leave training camp and quit the team, it's because they realize they just don't have it in them anymore. Their body gives out, their muscles ache, they're a step slower than they used to be, and they know it's the end of the road. But that's not the case here. If it was, this would be a non-story. His agent said that he had no idea that Barkum was going to leave the team, saying that he was happy with his contract. General Manager George Young had no idea, saying that Barkum was cooperative and gave no indications on this. Quarterback Jeff Rutledge had no idea, saying that Barkum seemed happy to be there and that no one saw a problem. Barkum's father, Elliot, had no idea, saying that everything seemed like it was on the up and he hadn't heard from his son. And head coach Bill Parcells had no idea, as Parcells said that he saw Barkum go past his office and what he thought was going to be a normal conversation turned into Barkum quitting the team. There was no reason given for Barkum's departure at first. Finally, a few days later, we got some indication as to why Barkum left. And the reason why he left? It's a doozy, because it had nothing to do with money, nothing to do with being homesick or the weirdness of playing for a different New York team, nothing to do with his body or health, nothing to do with his playing time, and nothing to do with his teammates or his coaching. As Barkum said, I was impressed with Coach Parcells, but I saw no reason to disrupt the continuity they have established. So let me get this straight. He went to camp to impress the Giants, then said, I don't want to mess up the continuity and team chemistry of a team that went 3-12-1 the year before, so I'm going to leave. But I still want the Giants to know that I can play. What kind of a strategy is that? I'm trying my best to follow Barkum's logic here, but I just can't seem to do it. Of all the reasons to give for leaving camp, that's the one? Naturally, Parcells was extremely confused by this, as was just about everyone involved. Parcells said on Barkum, "He's being very hasty. He really didn't give me a reason." Again, there were no indications, warning signs, or red flags or anything like that of something being wrong. Barkum just decided that he didn't want to mess up the team chemistry, despite the fact that it was July and half of the guys on the roster were going to be cut, and despite the fact that the Giants were entering 1984, on paper at least, as one of the worst teams in football, even if it obviously didn't work out that way. My head hurts from trying to put that all together. And as you can probably expect, this didn't exactly end well for Barkum. Despite all of that, and despite everything I just said, he was still somewhat hopeful that the Giants would bring him back. They did not, and I wonder why. I don't know why the Giants weren't jumping at the opportunity to bring a guy who left camp for no real reason whatsoever back onto the team. Barkum signed later in that offseason with Washington, but got cut by the end of the preseason and never played in the NFL again, meaning that the only team he ever played a regular season or postseason game with was the New York Jets. Barkum, even despite all the craziness that I brought up, was a very solid player who had somewhat been forgotten throughout NFL history. When you play more than a decade with the same team and post nearly 5,000 receiving yards and 40 touchdowns, especially with the bulk of that coming in the 70s when offenses were largely stagnant and were a far cry from what we have in today's game, you're doing something right. And while Barkum is not a Hall of Famer by any means, he still had a heck of a career, and considering his place in Jets history in the record books when his time ended there, I'm not sure there would be too much opposition if the Jets put this man in their Ring of Honor. However, what many people remember about someone is their last impression. And for many people, their last impression of Jerome Barkum is this absolutely bizarre spectacle with the Giants. He joined the team, then backed out a few days later for no reason whatsoever, despite nothing being wrong on the surface. And then when he did give a reason, it was one of the most backwards reasons I've ever heard, and even close to 40 years later, makes little to no sense whatsoever. With the New York Jets, Barkum is somewhat of a team legend. With the New York Giants, Barkum is a GOAT that fans would like to forget. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.